The chair beside Ethan Cole was empty. It wasn't supposed to matter. It was just a chair. 4 legs, scratched wood, a strip of faded green felt where someone's briefcase had once rested too long. But in Courtroom B of the Maple County Courthouse, that empty chair carried a weight heavier than any weapon Ethan had ever lifted in his life. Across the aisle, Madeline Cole noticed it immediately. Her eyes flicked from Ethan's worn jacket to the vacant space beside him, and something like satisfaction curved her mouth. Not a smile, a recognition. The kind predators have when they see there will be no fight. "No counsel?" she asked, loud enough for the room to hear. The question floated through the courtroom and landed like a slap. Ethan did not answer. He stood where the bailiff had directed him, hands clasped loosely in front of him, shoulders square by habit rather than confidence. His boots, clean but old, were planted shoulder-width apart, the way they had been drilled into him years ago on concrete parade grounds. He did not look at Madeline. He looked past her, toward the double doors at the back of the room. The chair remained empty. Madeline's attorney leaned toward her, whispering something that made her exhale a soft laugh. It was not cruel laughter. It was worse than that. It was dismissive, as if the outcome had already been written, and all that remained was the ceremony of humiliation. The judge entered. Everyone rose. Ethan stood a fraction too straight, his spine snapping into alignment before he caught himself. Old instincts died hard. Some never died at all. "Be seated," Judge Raymond Keller said, settling behind the bench with a weary familiarity. He was a man who had seen too many versions of the same story. Marriages unraveling, money weaponized, children turned into leverage. His eyes scanned the room, paused briefly on Ethan, then drifted to the empty chair. The pause was subtle, but Ethan felt it. "Case number 24-17, the judge said. Cole versus Cole, petition for dissolution and temporary orders." Madeline's attorney stood smoothly. Victor Hale, expensive suit, calm voice, the kind of man who never raised it because he had never needed to. "Ready for the petitioner, Your Honor." The judge nodded and turned to Ethan. "Mr. Cole, are you represented today?" The question was neutral, professional, but it cracked something open inside Ethan's chest. He swallowed. "I am," Ethan said. Madeline's head turned sharply. Her eyes darted once more to the empty chair, then back to Ethan's face. Judge Keller raised an eyebrow. "I don't see your counsel present. They're on their way," Ethan replied. Victor Hale let out a quiet breath that might have been mistaken for sympathy if it hadn't been sharpened by amusement. Madeline did not bother hiding her reaction. "That's interesting," she said, "because as of this morning, Ethan doesn't have access to a single account." The courtroom stirred. Judge Keller lifted a hand. "Mrs. Cole, you'll address the court through counsel." "Of course," she said sweetly, then glanced at Victor. Victor stood again. "Your Honor, my client is simply clarifying the record. As documented, all joint accounts were frozen pursuant to our emergency motion last Friday. Mr. Cole was notified." "Yes," the judge said slowly. "I recall granting a temporary freeze pending today's hearing." Ethan nodded once. He had received the notification, on his phone, while he was standing in line at a grocery store, calculating whether he could afford both bread and milk. Judge Keller turned back to him. "Mr. Cole, if you do not have counsel present, you may request a continuance." "I don't want a continuance," Ethan said. Madeline laughed. This time it was unmistakable. "I'm sorry," she said, covering her mouth with 2 fingers. "It's just, Your Honor, he doesn't have a lawyer. He can't." Victor shifted, pretending to caution her, but the damage was done. Judge Keller's gaze hardened. "Mrs. Cole, I'm not being cruel," she insisted. "I'm being honest. Ethan doesn't have money. He hasn't had steady work since he got back. He thinks his service makes him immune to consequences." Ethan finally looked at her, not with anger, not with pleading, with something older, quieter, a disappointment so deep it had no need to speak. "I don't think that," he said. "I think the truth matters." Madeline scoffed. "Truth doesn't pay retainers." Victor Hale cleared his throat. "Your Honor, given the circumstances, we would move to proceed with temporary orders today. My client and I are prepared. Mr. Cole has had ample notice. Any delay would only prejudice my client." Judge Keller leaned back in his chair, fingers steepled. "Mr. Cole, I need to be clear with you. Representing yourself in a matter involving financial disclosures, custody schedules, and spousal support is risky. Ethan nodded. I understand. And you still wish to proceed? Ethan's eyes flicked once more to the doors. They're coming, he said again, softer this time. Madeline shook her head. This is pathetic, she muttered. He's stalling. Victor said nothing, but his smile returned. Judge Keller sighed. He had heard this before. Desperation masquerading as hope. Mr. Cole, he said, voice firm but not unkind, if your attorney is not present when we begin, I will have no choice but to consider you self-represented for purposes of today's hearing. Ethan inhaled. The smell of the courtroom, old paper, disinfectant, stale air, slid into his lungs and settled there. It reminded him of other rooms, other waiting, other moments where the door had not opened in time. He clasped his hands tighter, feeling the faint scar along his left thumb. A souvenir from a place he never talked about. Madeline leaned toward Victor and whispered something. He nodded. Judge Keller lifted the gavel. Very well, he said. We will begin. The sound of the gavel echoed once, sharp and final. Ethan closed his eyes for half a second, not in prayer, in preparation. Because somewhere in the quiet behind him, beyond the thick wooden doors, a past he had buried was walking toward him, and whether it arrived in time or not would decide everything. Ethan Cole came home the way some storms leave town. Not with thunder, not with headlines, not with a parade that made the streets feel holy. He came back quietly, in the dull light of a Wednesday afternoon, stepping off a bus that sighed like it was tired of carrying other people's grief. He carried one duffel bag, no medals on display, no uniform, just a plain jacket, a body trained to notice exits, and eyes that had learned to measure rooms before they measured faces. Maple County had not changed. The same two-lane roads curved through the same fields. The same hardware store sign leaned a little more to the left. The diner still smelled like bacon and old coffee. The courthouse still looked like a building that believed it had the right to decide who deserved mercy. People said, "Welcome back," with the kind of warmth that required no effort and no responsibility. Ethan nodded. He thanked them. He didn't tell them what back meant, because back wasn't a place. Back was the way his hands sometimes tightened around nothing. Back was the way he woke up at 3:17 a.m., with his heart already running and his mouth tasting like dust. Back was the way silence could suddenly become too loud. He rented a small house on the edge of town, the kind of place with thin walls and a porch that creaked when you stepped wrong. On his first night there, he sat on the floor with his duffel bag unopened, not because he was too tired, because part of him still believed someone might tell him to move again, still believed the ground underneath was temporary. He didn't unpack until dawn. By the end of that first week, he had a job. Night security at a feed warehouse. Minimal talking, minimal people. The manager liked him because he showed up early and didn't complain. Ethan liked it because the nights were predictable. Just the hum of fluorescent lights and the sound of distant trucks passing on the highway like ocean waves that never reached shore. He worked nights, slept in fragments, and tried to train his body into ordinary life, but the body remembers. Sometimes a forklift beep would hit a certain pitch and his breath would leave him as if someone had punched him from the inside. Sometimes he'd hear a car backfire on Main Street and his shoulders would rise before his mind could explain why. He learned to excuse himself, to step into back rooms and press his palms against his thighs until the tremor passed. He did not call it panic. He called it weather. He told himself, "You're fine." Then he met Madeline. Or maybe it was more accurate to say, he met her again. They had known each other in high school, the way a small town forces people into each other's orbits. Maddie had been the girl with polished nails and a bright laugh, the kind that could make a hallway turn and look. Her father owned a chain of car dealerships. Her mother sat on committees that decided what kind of people were good for the community. Back then, Ethan had been the quiet boy with calloused hands from helping his uncle fix fences. The boy teachers respected because he never caused trouble. The boy girls noticed because he looked like he was made of restraint. They hadn't dated in high school. It would have been too loud, too much talk. But when Ethan came back, older and thinner and haunted in a way people could not describe, Madeline found him with the precision of someone who knew exactly what she wanted. She came into the diner where he sat alone with black coffee and a newspaper he wasn't really reading. "Ethan Cole," she said, like she was testing how the name felt in her mouth. He looked up. Her hair was longer now, her lipstick was softer, but her eyes were the same, sharp in a quiet way, like a knife resting on silk. "Maddie," he said. She smiled as if she had been waiting years for him to say it. That first month, she was kindness with perfect timing. She brought him food without asking if he'd eaten. She sat with him when the world made too much noise and did not demand conversation. She touched his wrist once, just once, when he flinched at a loud sound. And her voice was a gentle anchor. "Hey, you're here." It felt like being seen without being exposed. It felt safe. When she introduced him to her friends, she held his hand as if it belonged there. When she introduced him to her parents, she made a small show of pride. He served. Her father shook Ethan's hand a little too hard. Her mother smiled a little too carefully. But Maddie's eyes said, "This is mine." And for a man who had spent years feeling like a piece of furniture nobody noticed until it was in the way, being claimed felt like love. They married fast. Ethan did not want a spectacle. Maddie wanted it tasteful. They compromised on a small ceremony with big flowers. There were speeches that praised sacrifice and new beginnings. There was laughter that felt rehearsed, but warm enough to pass. Ethan wore a suit he borrowed. Maddie wore a dress that looked expensive without trying to. When she said her vows, her voice trembled at the right moments. When he said his hands shook, and he prayed nobody would notice. For a while it worked. For a while, the house felt like a place you could breathe. Maddie took care of the bills. Ethan didn't question it. It was easier. He was grateful. He picked up extra shifts. He fixed broken steps. He painted rooms. He changed oil. He cooked dinner when she worked late. He did the quiet labor of making a life stand upright. And when their son was born, Noah, Ethan cried in the hospital bathroom where no one could see him. Noah had Ethan's eyes, Maddie's mouth, and a tiny fist that gripped Ethan's finger like it was the only truth in the world. That first year, Ethan became softer, not weaker, softer. He learned the language of baby cries. He learned how to warm bottles and rock Noah through fever nights. He learned the shape of joy that didn't require noise. He thought, maybe I really am back. But power doesn't announce itself in marriages like theirs. It seeps. It begins as convenience and slowly becomes control. Maddie started saying small things. "Let me handle that. You'll forget. You don't understand how these accounts work. You shouldn't talk to my dad about finances. He thinks you're sensitive." Sensitive, like a wound. Ethan swallowed the word because he did not want conflict. Conflict felt like a door slamming. Conflict felt like alarms. Then came the first time she used his past like a weapon. It was over something small, a late bill, a misunderstanding. Ethan said he could pay it. Maddie laughed, not kindly. "With what?" she asked. "Your warehouse money?" He stared at her, and she corrected herself, too quickly, too sweetly. "I didn't mean it like that. I'm just stressed." She kissed his cheek afterward. He told himself it didn't matter. Then it happened again, and again. Each time her apologies arrived wrapped in affection, the way poison comes in a pretty bottle. The shift was gradual enough that Ethan did not notice it, until one morning he stood in the kitchen holding a bank statement he didn't recognize. "Where's my direct deposit going?" he asked. Maddie didn't look up from her phone. "Into our account." "Our account?" he repeated. She sighed, as if he were exhausting. "Ethan, don't start. It's all under control." He wanted to say, "It's my money too." But Noah was in the next room, and Ethan had learned in war that sometimes you keep your voice low for the sake of someone sleeping. So he said nothing. A month later, he tried to take Noah to the county fair. Maddie stopped him at the door. "Not today." "Why?" "Because I said so." He blinked. "Maddie, he's been asking." She stepped closer. Her voice dropped. "Don't undermine me." The words were soft. The meaning wasn't. Ethan stared at her as if she had become someone else wearing his wife's face. Noah tugged Ethan's sleeve. "Daddy?" Ethan crouched, smiled, lied gently. "We'll go another day, buddy." And he felt something inside him shift, like a piece of furniture scraping across a floor. Later that night, Maddie said, "You're not good with structure." He didn't understand. She explained with the calm certainty of someone making rules. "You get emotional, you overreact. That's why I handle the schedule. That's why I handle the money. That's why I handle Noah's school decisions." Ethan listened as if she were listing facts about the weather. Then she added, almost casually, "It's not your fault. It's the things you've seen." There it was, his past, dragged into the room like a dog on a leash. Ethan felt heat rise behind his eyes. He forced it down. "I'm his father," he said. "And I'm his mother." Maddie replied. "And my family has lawyers." The sentence ended like a locked door. That was the first time Ethan understood something important. He was not in a marriage with a woman. He was in a marriage with a system built from money, reputation, and the quiet confidence that rules were for other people. Ethan tried to fight it the way he fought everything, with patience. He suggested counseling. Maddie smiled and said she didn't have time. He tried to open his own account. Maddie found out and asked, "Are you hiding something?" He tried to talk to her parents. Her mother said, "We don't air family matters." He tried to speak to a lawyer once. He sat in a waiting room with cracked leather chairs, listening to a receptionist chew gum like she hated the world. The lawyer glanced at his paperwork and said, "Retainer starts at 5,000. Ethan nodded like 5,000 was just a number. He walked out and sat in his truck for 20 minutes with his forehead against the steering wheel, hearing his own breath like it belonged to a stranger. That was the day Maddie filed. He came home from a night shift and found an envelope on the kitchen counter. The house was too quiet. Noah's toys were gone from the living room. The refrigerator had been cleaned out as if someone was erasing evidence of a life. Divorce papers, temporary restraining order from finances, emergency motion to freeze joint assets, a proposed custody schedule that gave him alternating weekends like a distant uncle. He read the pages once, then again. It felt like watching someone else's life get measured and divided by people who had never held his child at 2 a.m. when the fever wouldn't break. His hands shook. He made coffee. He didn't drink it. When Maddie finally came home, she looked fresh, composed, almost relieved. "I'm not doing this to hurt you," she said. Ethan's voice came out rough. "Then why does it read like a plan to bury me?" Maddie stared at him as if he were being dramatic. "It's just legal. Don't take it personally." Don't take it personally, as if a man's child could be reduced to a clause. Ethan tried to keep his voice steady. "I need access to my paycheck. I need to pay rent. You'll be fine," Maddie said. "You always find a way. You're resilient." The word sounded like a compliment, but it landed like permission to suffer. Then she looked him in the eye and said the sentence that would follow him into Courtroom B like a shadow. "If you make this ugly, Ethan, you won't like how it ends." He stared at her. Not because he didn't understand, because he did. That night, Ethan drove to the edge of town and parked beside the river where the water moved as if it had somewhere to go. He sat there in the dark and watched his own hands on the steering wheel. He thought about war. Then he thought about how this felt worse in a quieter way, because in war, at least you knew who was aiming at you. In this, the person smiling across the table had the knife already in your ribs, and everyone called it paperwork. He went home before dawn. He stood in Noah's empty room and breathed in the smell of baby soap still lingering in the walls. His chest tightened. He held onto the crib rail like it was the last solid thing in a world-turning liquid. In the morning, he went to the courthouse to file his response. The clerk barely looked up. The forms were endless. The language was sharp and cold, like it was designed to cut feeling out of human beings. Ethan filled them out anyway. His handwriting was careful, almost too neat. Because the only thing he could control right now was the way his pen moved. And when the date for the hearing arrived, Ethan put on his best jacket, checked his wallet, and realized he had $27. Not enough for a lawyer, not enough for pride, but enough for gas to get to court. He drove there with the sun rising pale over the fields, and he told himself one thing again and again, like a vow. I will not beg. I will not break. I will not lose my son without being seen. And when he walked into Courtroom B and saw the empty chair beside him, he did not panic. He did not plead. He only looked toward the doors at the back of the room, because there were some kinds of help a man refuses until he has no choice. And Ethan had reached the place where choice ran out. Ethan learned quickly that power did not always raise its voice. Sometimes it signed its name at the bottom of a page and let the ink do the damage. After Maddie filed, the world began to shrink around him, not all at once, but inch by inch, like a room quietly losing oxygen. It wasn't dramatic, it was administrative, and that made it harder to fight. The first thing to go was access. His debit card declined at a gas station on Route 9. The clerk glanced at him with mild annoyance, the kind reserved for people who waste time. Ethan apologized out of habit, stepped aside, tried again. Same result. He paid cash, what little he had left. Later that afternoon, his phone buzzed with a notification from the bank. Account access restricted pending court review. No explanation, no warning, just a locked door where there had been a hallway an hour earlier. He stood in the parking lot, phone in his hand, sunlight pressing down on his shoulders, and felt something familiar slide into place behind his ribs. Not panic, not fear, containment. In the Army, containment meant you were being boxed in without realizing it yet. He drove home slowly, every mile suddenly expensive. At the house, he checked the mailbox. Inside was a letter from the electric company, polite and firm. Payment overdue, service interruption scheduled. He laughed once, quietly, at the absurdity of it. Maddie had always paid the bills. He'd never asked how, he'd never wanted to. Now he understood the cost of not wanting to know. That evening, Maddie arrived with the efficiency of someone who had already rearranged the furniture in her head. She walked in like she still owned the place, keys jingling, heels sharp against the tile. "I transferred Noah's school pickup to my sister," she said, not looking at him. "It's better for consistency." Ethan stared at her. "You didn't tell me." "I didn't have to," she replied. "It's temporary." Temporary was the word people used when they wanted permission to do permanent damage. "I'm his father," Ethan said. "And I'm protecting him," Maddie countered. "You're not stable right now." The sentence was delivered calmly, almost kindly. Ethan felt it land like a report filed somewhere he couldn't reach. "What does that mean?" he asked. She sighed, as if the question tired her. "It means I don't want Noah exposed to your moods, to your episodes." "I don't have episodes." Maddie finally looked at him. Her gaze was steady, assessing. "You flinch when doors slam," she said. "You wake up shouting sometimes. You stare at walls like they're about to move. Don't make me document that." Document. The word echoed. Ethan felt the room tilt slightly. He sat down at the kitchen table, the same table where he'd fed Noah cereal and taught him how to hold a spoon. "You're threatening me," he said quietly. Maddie shook her head. "I'm being realistic." She placed a folder on the table. Inside were copies of things he recognized too late. Medical notes from a VA visit, a therapist's intake form he'd filled out once and never followed up on, a prescription he'd thrown away because it made him feel numb. "I'm not saying you're dangerous," she continued. "I'm saying the court will ask questions, and I need to answer them." Ethan closed his eyes. He remembered a medic once telling him, "After a long night and too much blood, they won't kill you outright. They'll bleed you slow." This felt like that. Over the next week, the restrictions multiplied. His paycheck went into an account he couldn't touch. The truck he drove to work was suddenly listed as joint property under dispute. Maddie texted him a reminder that he was not authorized to sell or modify it. The daycare called him one morning to say he was no longer on the approved pickup list. He stood in the warehouse break room holding the phone, fluorescent lights buzzing overhead, and said nothing, while the woman on the line explained policy like it was gravity. When he hung up, his hands were shaking, not from rage, from the effort of holding it in. Ethan tried to be reasonable. He emailed Maddie, carefully worded, respectful, asking for partial access to funds so he could retain counsel. Her reply came an hour later. "Talk to your lawyer." He stared at the screen, then at the balance in his wallet. $21 now. He drove to the legal aid office in town, the one with the peeling sign and the waiting room that smelled like burnt coffee. He filled out forms. He sat. He waited. A woman called his name and took him into a small office with a flickering lamp. She skimmed his paperwork, nodding slowly. "Divorce with custody involved," she said. "Asset freeze. Allegations of instability." "Allegations?" Ethan repeated. She looked at him kindly. "It doesn't matter yet whether they're true. It matters that they're on record. Can you help me?" he asked. She hesitated. "I can give you advice," she said. "But representation, we're overloaded, and cases like this," she trailed off. "Like what?" "Like ones where the other party has money and time." Ethan nodded. He had learned to recognize defeat when it was being dressed up as compassion. He left with pamphlets and phone numbers and the hollow feeling of having done everything right and still losing ground. At night, sleep came in pieces. He would wake to the sound of nothing and feel his heart racing as if he'd been called to move. Sometimes he reached for Noah instinctively, hand patting the empty space beside him. The house echoed. One night, he dreamed of standing in a hallway with doors on both sides, each labeled with a decision he hadn't made fast enough. He woke with sweat on his neck and the word unfit pounding behind his eyes. The next morning, Maddie sent a message. "If you contest custody, I will request a psychological evaluation." Ethan sat on the edge of the bed, phone in his hand, staring at the wall where Noah's height marks were still penciled in faint lines. He typed back slowly. "I just want to see my son." The reply came almost instantly. Then, "Cooperate." That was when Ethan understood. This wasn't about fairness. It was about compliance. She wanted him small, agreeable, grateful for scraps of access. She wanted the court to see him the way she now spoke about him: unstable, unreliable, lucky to be tolerated. And the system was built to help her do it, because the system loved paperwork more than people, because the system mistook calm cruelty for order. Ethan began keeping records, not because he thought it would save him, but because it was something he could do. He saved texts. He printed emails at the library. He wrote dates and times in a small notebook he kept in his jacket pocket. Each entry was precise, almost military. Monday, 9:42 a.m. Told I could not pick up Noah. Wednesday, card declined. No access to wages. Friday, threat of evaluation. He didn't know if it mattered, but it made him feel less invisible. The night before the hearing, he laid everything out on the kitchen table. Papers overlapping, notes, bank statements with red lines drawn under numbers he no longer controlled. He stared at it all and felt the old urge rise, the one that told him to take responsibility, to fix it himself, to absorb the damage quietly so others didn't have to. That urge had kept him alive once. Now it was killing him. He picked up his phone and scrolled through contacts he hadn't touched in years. Names of men who had shared rations and foxholes. Names of people who knew him in pieces. He stopped on one. Dad. The name sat there like a loaded question. He hadn't spoken to his father in 20 years. Not since the argument that ended with a slammed door and words neither of them could take back. His father had wanted him to stay, to study law, to be safe. Ethan had wanted out. They had never repaired it. Pride on both sides. Silence doing the rest. Ethan stared at the screen. He thought about Noah. He thought about the word unfit. He set the phone down without calling. Some doors, once closed, were harder to open than courtrooms. The next morning, Ethan put on his jacket, checked his wallet again, and drove to the courthouse with the radio off. He walked past the flag out front and into the building that smelled like old decisions. He passed through security. He followed the signs to Courtroom B. When he entered, Madeline was already there, seated beside Victor Hale, her posture relaxed, confident. She glanced at him and then at the empty chair beside him. Her lips curved. Ethan sat down. He placed his notebook on the table. He folded his hands. He breathed. When the judge entered and asked if he was represented, Ethan said yes. When the judge asked where his lawyer was, Ethan said they were coming. And when the gavel lifted and the air in the room tightened, Ethan kept his eyes on the doors behind him. Because even now, even after everything, part of him still believed that some fights were not meant to be fought alone. Courtroom B had a way of draining color from people. The walls were a tired beige, the kind that pretended to be neutral while quietly reminding everyone that nothing here was meant to be comfortable. The ceiling lights hummed faintly, not loud enough to complain about, just loud enough to make silence feel brittle. Even the benches seemed to lean inward, as if listening. Ethan sat at the defense table, his back straight, his hands folded over his notebook. The empty chair beside him looked larger now that everyone had noticed it. It was no longer just absence. It was a statement. Madeline sat across the aisle with Victor Hale angled slightly toward her, his body language a practiced shield. He murmured something, and she nodded, crossing her legs with ease. She looked rested, certain, like a person who believed this room existed for her benefit. Judge Keller took his seat and adjusted the papers before him. He did not look up right away. He read. He marked. He sighed once, quietly, like a man bracing himself for something he already disliked. "All right," he said at last. "Let's proceed." Victor Hale rose smoothly. "Thank you, Your Honor. On behalf of the petitioner, we are requesting temporary orders consistent with the filings already submitted to the court." He spoke with confidence, but not arrogance. That was his craft. He sounded reasonable. He sounded inevitable. "As the court is aware," Victor continued, "my client has been the primary financial provider and caregiver. Mr. Cole has experienced difficulty adjusting to civilian life, which has impacted his employment stability and emotional regulation." Ethan felt the words land one by one. Difficulty, adjusting, emotional regulation. Each phrase had been polished until it could cut without drawing blood. Victor gestured lightly toward Ethan, not looking at him. We are requesting continued control of joint assets by my client, supervised visitation pending evaluation, and the continuation of the temporary custody schedule already in place. Madeline's gaze never left Ethan's face. Judge Keller looked up. His eyes moved from Victor to Madeline, then finally to Ethan. He studied Ethan longer than before, as if searching for something he could not quite name. "Mr. Cole," the judge said, "you've heard the request." "Yes, Your Honor. Do you wish to respond?" Ethan stood. The movement was automatic, clean, efficient. He placed one hand on the table to steady himself and felt the grain of the wood under his palm, solid, real. "Yes," he said, "I do." He did not raise his voice. He did not pace. He simply spoke. "I am not unstable," Ethan said. "I am employed. I have never harmed my son. I have never missed a visitation unless I was prevented from attending." Victor Hale stood again, smoothly interrupting. "Your Honor, if I may—" Judge Keller raised a hand. "Mr. Cole has the floor." Ethan nodded once in thanks. "My wife froze all accounts without notice," Ethan continued. "I was not given access to my own wages. I was removed from school pickup lists without explanation. These actions prevented me from retaining counsel." Madeline laughed softly. Judge Keller's eyes snapped to her. "Mrs. Cole," she raised her hand slightly. "Apologies, Your Honor. It's just... Ethan makes it sound like a conspiracy. He didn't retain counsel because he didn't prioritize it." Ethan turned to her. "Tell the court how much a retainer costs," he said. Madeline blinked, then smiled. "I don't know exactly." Victor stepped in. "$5,000, Your Honor, at minimum." "And did Mr. Cole have access to $5,000? Ethan asked, looking at the judge now. Madeline answered before Victor could. "No, because he spends irresponsibly." The word irresponsible slid into the room like a stain. Ethan felt his jaw tighten. "I spend on rent," he said. "Food, gas, my sir." Victor smiled thinly. "Your Honor, this is exactly the concern. Mr. Cole becomes emotional when discussing finances. He lacks the discipline required for long-term planning." Judge Keller leaned forward slightly. "Mr. Cole, have you received treatment for post-service stress?" Ethan hesitated, not because he was ashamed, because he knew how this worked. "Yes," he said. "I spoke to someone at the VA." "How many times?" "Once." Madeline leaned forward now, her voice low but carrying. "He didn't continue because he said it made him feel numb." "That's not stability. That's honesty," Ethan said quietly. Victor interjected again. "Your Honor, the petitioner is not questioning Mr. Cole's character. We are questioning his capacity." "Capacity," the word echoed. Judge Keller rubbed his temples. "Mr. Cole, the court must consider the child's best interest." "I know," Ethan said. "That's why I'm here." Madeline shook her head. "You're here because you can't let go." Ethan looked at her, really looked. "I'm here because he's my son," he said, "and because silence isn't consent." The room stilled. Judge Keller looked down at his notes, then back up. "Mr. Cole, without counsel present, your ability to challenge these requests is limited." "I understand," Ethan said. Victor seized the opening. "Then, Your Honor, we would ask the court to proceed with temporary orders today. The petitioner has complied fully with disclosure." "Mr. Cole has not." "Because he couldn't," Ethan said. Madeline sighed theatrically. "He always has an excuse." Judge Keller's gaze hardened. "Mrs. Cole, I will remind you again." "I'm sorry," she said, but there was no remorse in it. "I'm just frustrated. I've carried this family. I've carried Ethan, and now he wants to fight." She turned toward Ethan, eyes sharp. "You should have stayed quiet." Ethan felt something inside him go very still. Judge Keller looked at the clock on the wall, then at the empty chair beside Ethan. "Mr. Cole," he said slowly, "where is your attorney?" Ethan did not answer immediately. The room seemed to lean in. "They're coming," Ethan said again. Madeline laughed outright this time. "This is embarrassing." Victor placed a hand on her arm, but she shrugged him off. "He thinks someone's going to swoop in and save him." "This isn't a movie." Judge Keller's expression darkened. "Mrs. Cole, one more outburst." "I'm sorry," she said again, "but it needs to be said. Ethan doesn't have a lawyer because no one believes in this case, not even his own family." The words hit harder than she intended. Ethan felt the breath leave him in a rush. Victor looked uncomfortable for the first time. Judge Keller closed his file slowly. "Mr. Cole," he said, voice measured, "I cannot delay indefinitely. If your counsel is not present within the next few minutes, I will have to consider you self-represented for purposes of issuing temporary orders." Ethan nodded. Inside his chest, something shifted. Not fear, not despair, acceptance. He had done everything he could do alone. He stood there, listening to the hum of the lights, the scrape of a chair behind him, the quiet certainty on Madeline's face. He thought of Noah. He thought of the river at night. He thought of the phone contact he hadn't called. Judge Keller lifted the gavel slightly, not yet striking. "Last opportunity," he said. "Is your attorney present?" Ethan did not look away from the doors. "No," he said, "not yet." Madeline exhaled in triumph. Victor straightened, ready. Judge Keller inhaled, preparing to speak. And then the doors at the back of Courtroom B opened. When the sound was not loud. It wasn't the dramatic crash people later described when they retold the story. It was simply the soft, deliberate push of heavy wood against old hinges, a sound most people would have ignored if they weren't already holding their breath. But in Courtroom B, it cut through the air like a blade. The doors opened, not wide, not fast, just enough. A figure stepped into the gap, paused for half a second as if assessing the room, then entered fully and let the doors close behind him with a quiet finality. He did not rush. He did not apologize. He walked with the measured certainty of someone who had spent a lifetime arriving exactly where he intended to be. The man was tall, though age had softened his height into something more compact, more solid. His hair was steel gray, cut short. His suit was dark, unremarkable in brand, immaculately pressed. No jewelry, no flourish, just a small, worn pin on his lapel. An insignia most people wouldn't recognize, but Ethan did. James Cole stood in the doorway of Courtroom B. For a moment, no one spoke. Judge Keller froze with the gavel still lifted an inch above the block. Victor Hale turned halfway in his chair, irritation already forming, then stopped. His expression shifted, not to fear exactly, but to something more unsettling, recognition. Madeline frowned. "Who is that?" she whispered. James Cole took 3 steps forward, then stopped. He scanned the room the way some men scan terrain, not looking for faces, but for angles, exits, power. His eyes passed over Madeline without lingering, passed over Victor Hale with mild interest, then settled on Ethan. For the first time since walking into the courtroom, something in James Cole's face changed. Not softness, not regret, recognition. Ethan felt it like a hand placed between his shoulder blades. His chest tightened. He had not seen his father in 20 years. Not since the night they had stood on opposite sides of a kitchen table much like this one. Voices raised, futures incompatible, pride cutting cleaner than any blade. James had wanted Ethan to stay, to study, to follow a path paved with law books and stability. Ethan had wanted out. They had never forgiven each other for it. Now, James Cole adjusted the strap of the leather briefcase in his hand and spoke. "Your Honor," he said, his voice calm, even, carrying easily across the room without effort. "James Cole, I'm entering my appearance as counsel for the respondent." The room shifted. Judge Keller blinked once. "Mr. Cole?" "James Cole," he repeated. "Attorney, retired." Victor Hale stood abruptly. "Your Honor, we object." James raised a hand, not toward Victor, but toward the judge. It wasn't aggressive, it was practiced. "If I may finish," James said, "I'm also the respondent's father." The words landed heavily. Madeline's face drained of color. "Father?" she repeated, louder than she meant to. "That's not... He never..." James turned his head slightly, just enough to acknowledge her existence. "You never asked," he said. Silence followed. Judge Keller cleared his throat. "Mr. Cole, this court will need to verify..." James was already moving. He crossed the aisle, placed his bar card and identification on the clerk's desk, then returned to stand beside Ethan's table. Ethan did not look at him. He could feel his father's presence like heat off a fire, familiar, dangerous, impossible to ignore. Judge Keller examined the documents, then leaned back in his chair. "You are admitted in this state?" the judge said slowly. "Yes," James replied. "And you are prepared to proceed?" James looked down at Ethan for the first time since entering the room. "You ready?" he asked quietly. Ethan swallowed. His throat burned. "Yes," he said. James nodded once. Then yes, he said to the judge. I'm prepared. Victor Hale's composure cracked. Your Honor, he said sharply, this is highly irregular. This court cannot allow surprise counsel to derail proceedings. Judge Keller held up a hand. Counsel has the right to representation. And given what I've just heard, the judge continued, a brief adjustment is not unreasonable. Madeline leaned toward Victor, whispering urgently. He didn't respond. His eyes were locked on James Cole now, calculating. James set his briefcase on the table and opened it. Inside were not stacks of paper spilling out in chaos, but neatly ordered folders, labeled in block letters. He removed one and placed it flat before him. Your Honor, James said, before we discuss temporary orders, I'd like to address the circumstances under which my son appeared in this courtroom without representation, Victor scoffed. With respect, that's irrelevant. James turned to him fully for the first time. Sit down, he said. Not loudly, not angrily. Victor opened his mouth, then stopped. He sat. The room felt smaller. James continued, voice level. Mr. Cole's access to joint funds was terminated without notice. His wages were redirected. His ability to retain counsel was deliberately obstructed. Madeline stood. That's not true. James did not look at her. I have bank records, he said, text messages, email correspondence, and a sworn affidavit from my son documenting repeated threats tied to financial compliance. Judge Keller leaned forward. Threats? James slid a page across the table toward the bench. Specifically, Your Honor, threats to restrict parental access unless Mr. Cole agreed to terms presented without negotiation. The judge scanned the document. His jaw tightened. Victor stood again, more cautiously this time. Your Honor, these are allegations which we will substantiate, James replied, cutting him off. But more importantly, they establish a pattern of financial coercion. Madeline laughed sharply. This is absurd. Ethan is trying to paint himself as a victim. James finally looked at her, truly looked. Mrs. Cole, he said, you've mistaken restraint for weakness. Madeline stiffened. James turned back to the judge. My son did not come here to perform. He came because his child was being leveraged against him. Ethan felt something in his chest loosen, just slightly. Judge Keller removed his glasses and rubbed the bridge of his nose. Mr. Cole, he said to James, why did you wait until now? James answered without hesitation. Because my son did not ask. The words settled like dust. And when he did, the judge pressed. James glanced at Ethan again. He didn't have to. Ethan finally looked up. Their eyes met. There was no apology there, no absolution, just alignment. James returned his attention to the bench. Your Honor, before any temporary orders are considered, we request an immediate review of the emergency asset freeze and the basis upon which allegations of instability were raised. Victor inhaled sharply. That would require disclosure, James finished. Yes. Judge Keller sat back. The courtroom waited. Finally, he nodded. I will allow limited argument on those points. Madeline's confidence faltered for the first time. James placed one hand flat on the table. Thank you, Your Honor. He turned slightly toward Ethan. You okay? He asked quietly. Ethan nodded, once. James straightened. The fight had begun, not loudly, not dramatically, but with the kind of precision that left no room for escape. And Madeline, for the first time since this began, looked unsure, because James Cole did not raise his voice. He didn't need to. He stood where he was, one hand resting on the edge of the defense table, the other loose at his side, and allowed the room to settle into him. Silence gathered around his posture the way weather gathers around a mountain. Even the hum of the lights seemed to dim, as if the building itself understood that something precise was about to happen. Your Honor, James began, the court has before it a request for temporary orders premised on 3 assertions: financial responsibility, parental fitness, and stability. I'd like to address them in that order. Victor Hale shifted in his chair, not enough to draw attention, but enough to betray discomfort. Madeline's fingers tightened around the pen in her hand. James opened the first folder. Financial responsibility, he said. The petitioner asserts that Mr. Cole has been irresponsible with money, thereby justifying unilateral control of joint assets. He slid a document across the table toward the bailiff, who carried it to the bench. This is a wage statement from Mr. Cole's employer, James continued. Direct deposit redirected, without his consent, 3 days after the petition was filed. Judge Keller scanned the page, then looked up. Mrs. Cole, Madeline spoke quickly. That was temporary, to ensure bills were paid. James nodded once, as if acknowledging a point in a lecture. And this, he said, producing another page, is a bank notification showing the respondent's debit access was restricted entirely. Not limited, not monitored, restricted. Victor stood. Your Honor, asset freezes are standard in contentious divorces. They are, James agreed, not looking at him, when applied evenly. He placed a second folder on the table and opened it. This, he said, is the petitioner's account activity during the same period. A murmur rippled through the gallery. Judge Keller's eyes narrowed as he reviewed the pages. Charges stood out: restaurants, travel, purchases that did not resemble restraint. Mrs. Cole, the judge said, can you explain why joint funds were restricted for one party while remaining fully accessible to the other? Madeline opened her mouth, then closed it. I was maintaining normal household operations. James tilted his head slightly. Including a weekend stay in Asheville? Madeline flushed. That was pre-planned. Victor cleared his throat. Your Honor, James continued without pause. Financial control that prevents one party from retaining counsel while the other continues discretionary spending is not maintenance. It is leverage. Judge Keller leaned back, considering. Let's move to parental fitness, James said calmly. Ethan felt his shoulders tense. This was the part that hurt. James did not soften his tone. He sharpened it. The petitioner has implied that my son's military service has left him emotionally unfit to parent. Madeline crossed her arms. I didn't imply. I stated concerns. Concerns, James repeated. Based on what? His behavior, she said. His moods. James nodded. Let's be specific. He lifted a page. This is a text message from Mrs. Cole to Mr. Cole dated March 14th. Quote, if you don't agree to my schedule, I'll tell the court you're unstable. End quote. Madeline stiffened. That was taken out of context. James flipped the page. Context follows. You don't want them looking into your past. End quote. The room went very quiet. Judge Keller looked at Madeline for a long moment. Mrs. Cole? She shifted. I was emotional. James's voice remained steady. Emotional statements do not include legal threats. Victor stood again. Your Honor, these messages demonstrate coercion, James finished. They also demonstrate intent. He turned another page. This is a letter from Noah's school, James said, removing Mr. Cole from the approved pickup list. The request came from Mrs. Cole. No court order, no finding of unfitness. Madeline's jaw clenched. I was protecting my child. James met her eyes. By cutting his father out without cause? Ethan felt his chest tighten, then ease. Not relief, recognition. Someone was finally naming it. Judge Keller folded his hands. Mr. Cole, he said to James, do you have evidence of actual harm to the child? Yes, James replied, but not the kind usually considered. He gestured toward Ethan without turning. The harm of uncertainty. The harm of absence engineered, not earned. The judge said nothing. James closed the folder and opened the next. Stability, he said. This is where words are often used to hide actions. He lifted a single page. This is a VA intake note. 1 visit, no diagnosis, no recommendation of impairment. Yet it has been referenced repeatedly to suggest instability. Madeline interjected. He didn't follow up. Because he didn't need to, James replied. Seeking help once is not evidence of incapacity. It is evidence of responsibility. Victor exhaled sharply. Your Honor, we are drifting into rhetoric. James finally turned to him. No, he said. We're drifting into accuracy. He faced the bench again. Your Honor, my son's service record reflects commendations for judgment under pressure. His employment record shows consistency. His parenting record shows involvement until it was obstructed. Ethan swallowed. He had never heard his life summarized that way. Clean, undiminished. Judge Keller removed his glasses again. He looked tired but alert. Mr. Hale, the judge said, do you wish to respond? Victor stood slowly. Your Honor, even if some of these actions appear heavy-handed, they do not negate the petitioner's concern for order. James nodded, as if conceding a minor point. Order imposed by fear is not order. It is control. Madeline laughed once, brittle. You're turning this into a speech. James looked at her, and this time there was something like steel in his eyes. "No," he said. "I'm turning it into a record." He reached into his briefcase and produced a small notebook. "This," he said, "belongs to my son." Ethan's breath caught. He recognized it instantly. James opened it and held it up so the judge could see the neat handwriting. Dates, times, denials of access, threats, each entry contemporaneous. Victor frowned. "Your Honor, that's hearsay." "It's documentation," James replied, "and it aligns with digital records already submitted." Judge Keller extended his hand. The bailiff brought the notebook forward. The judge flipped through several pages, then closed it carefully. "Mr. Hale," he said, "this court does not look favorably on tactics that use a child as leverage." Madeline's face paled. James pressed gently but firmly. "We are not asking for immediate reversal of custody today. We are asking that the court acknowledge what has occurred and prevent further harm." Judge Keller nodded slowly. "I am inclined to modify the temporary orders." Victor's head snapped up. "Your Honor, I will restore limited financial access to Mr. Cole for purposes of legal representation," the judge continued. "I will also order immediate disclosure of all communications pertaining to custody decisions." Madeline whispered something urgently to Victor. He didn't respond. Ethan felt a warmth spread through his chest that had nothing to do with victory. It was the feeling of ground returning beneath his feet. James did not smile. "Thank you, Your Honor," he said. Judge Keller looked at Ethan. "Mr. Cole, you've been patient." Ethan nodded. He didn't trust his voice. The judge turned back to the docket. "We will recess briefly before continuing." The gavel struck. James closed his folders with care. Ethan leaned toward him. "You didn't have to." "I did," James said quietly. "Not because you asked, because it was time." They sat in silence as the courtroom emptied. Madeline stood across the room, speaking in low, urgent tones to Victor. Her certainty had cracked. Not shattered, but cracked enough for light to get in. James gathered his papers. "This isn't over," he said to Ethan. "They'll push harder." Ethan nodded. "I know." James met his eyes. "Good." The doors to Courtroom B closed again, softer this time. And for the first time since this began, Ethan understood something with absolute clarity. The system had been built to forget men like him. But paper remembered. And now the record was speaking. The recess did not calm Madeline. It sharpened her. Ethan watched her from across the hallway as people drifted in and out of the courthouse like tired birds returning to familiar ledges. She paced in a tight line near the vending machines, phone pressed to her ear, voice low but urgent. Victor Hale stood a few feet away, arms crossed, eyes fixed on the floor as if trying to calculate his way out of a narrowing corridor. James sat beside Ethan on a wooden bench, his briefcase closed now, his posture relaxed but alert. He did not speak. He never filled silence unless it served a purpose. Ethan didn't thank him, not yet. Gratitude felt premature, fragile, like thanking a bridge before you were fully across it. The bailiff called them back in. Courtroom B filled again, quieter this time. The spectators, 2 retirees, a clerk on lunch break, a young woman waiting for traffic court, sensed something had shifted. People could feel it when certainty changed hands. Judge Keller returned, expression neutral but eyes sharper now. He looked at both parties, then directly at Victor Hale. "Mr. Hale," he said, "you may proceed with any witnesses relevant to the temporary orders." Victor stood. He adjusted his tie, glanced at Madeline, then back at the bench. "Your Honor," he began carefully, "at this time we believe the written record sufficiently establishes—" "No," Madeline interrupted. The word cut through him. Victor turned, startled. "Madeline," she stood. "I want to speak," she said. Judge Keller's gaze hardened. "Mrs. Cole, you may testify if you wish." "I do," she said immediately. Ethan felt James shift slightly beside him. Madeline walked to the witness stand with the confidence of someone used to being believed. She swore in without hesitation, sat upright, folded her hands. Victor approached her with measured steps. "Mrs. Cole," he said, voice soothing, "can you explain to the court why you felt it necessary to restrict Mr. Cole's access to finances?" Madeline nodded. "Because Ethan is unpredictable." Ethan did not move. "Unpredictable how?" Victor prompted. "He shuts down," she said. "He goes quiet for days. He stares. He forgets things." Did he ever harm your child? Victor asked. No, Madeline admitted quickly, but harm isn't always physical. James's pen stilled. Madeline continued, warming to her narrative. I've lived with him. I've seen the nightmares, the anger he doesn't express until it leaks out sideways. I couldn't risk Noah growing up around that. Victor nodded solemnly. So, your actions were preventative? Yes, Madeline said. Protective. James stood. Cross, he said. Victor hesitated. Your Honor. Judge Keller nodded. Proceed. James walked to the podium, not hurried, not dramatic. He rested both hands lightly on the wood and looked at Madeline as if she were a document he intended to read thoroughly. Mrs. Cole, he said, you've described my son as unpredictable. Do you recall writing this message? He held up a page. Madeline squinted. I'd have to see it. James handed it to the bailiff, who passed it up. Madeline read. Her jaw tightened. James spoke aloud as she read. If you don't agree to my terms, I'll make sure the court knows how unstable you are. Is that accurate? Madeline shifted. I was angry. James nodded. Anger doesn't fabricate language. He flipped another page. You're lucky I'm being patient. Other women would take the child and disappear. Madeline's voice sharpened. That was a joke. James tilted his head. A joke designed to induce fear? Victor stood. Objection, argumentative. Overruled, Judge Keller said. Answer the question. Madeline exhaled. I was venting. James stepped closer. Did you ever tell Mr. Cole that if he contested custody, you would request a psychological evaluation? Madeline hesitated. Yes, she said. And was that before or after you restricted his access to funds? Before. And was the purpose of that statement to express concern, James asked calmly, or to compel compliance? Madeline looked at Victor. Judge Keller leaned forward. Mrs. Cole, answer. Her voice dropped. To make him stop fighting. The room went still. James nodded once, as if confirming a footnote. No further questions, he said. Madeline stepped down, her confidence dented, but not broken. She avoided Ethan's eyes as she returned to her seat. Victor cleared his throat. Your Honor, the petitioner rests. James did not hesitate. Your Honor, he said, the respondent calls Ms. Laura Benton. A woman in her late 40s stood from the back row. Sensible shoes, cardigan. A face shaped by responsibility. She approached the stand, swore in. Ms. Benton, James said gently, can you tell the court your occupation? I'm Noah's kindergarten teacher, she replied. Madeline stiffened. James nodded. How long have you known Ethan Cole? 2 years, Laura said, since Noah started school. And during that time, James asked, did you ever observe behavior from Mr. Cole that concerned you regarding his parenting? Laura shook her head. No. He was always prepared, always gentle. He volunteered for classroom help. He listened. Did you ever receive a request to remove him from the pickup list? Yes. When? 2 weeks ago. And was there any court order attached to that request? No. Madeline shifted in her chair. James thanked her and sat. Next, he called Mark Rivera. A broad-shouldered man with tired eyes took the stand. His posture was casual, but his gaze was sharp. Mr. Rivera, James said. How do you know Ethan? We served together, Mark replied. 2 tours. And how would you describe his conduct under stress? Mark didn't smile. He was the one you wanted next to you? Calm, steady. He noticed things before they went wrong. Victor crossed his arms. James asked, did you ever see Ethan lose control? No. Did he ever abandon responsibility? Mark shook his head. Never. The weight of it settled into the room, not praise, but testimony. The kind that didn't exaggerate. James called one final witness, a young man from the bank. He spoke in numbers and timestamps. He confirmed the redirection of funds, the restrictions placed without dual consent. The timing. Judge Keller listened without interrupting. When it was over, the room felt fuller, not louder, but denser, as if voices that had been missing had finally arrived. James returned to his seat. Victor Hale stood slowly. Your Honor, he said, choosing each word carefully, we maintain that the petitioner acted in good faith. James did not respond. Judge Keller looked at Madeline, then at Ethan, then at the file in front of him, now thick with additions. Mrs. Cole, the judge said, do you wish to add anything? Madeline opened her mouth, closed it. She shook her head. Ethan felt something shift again, not triumph, not satisfaction, recognition. The judge nodded once. Very well, he set his pen down. This court has heard enough to determine that certain actions taken were disproportionate and coercive. Madeline's breath hitched. We will address orders shortly, the judge continued. But first, he looked directly at Ethan. Mr. Cole, thank you for your restraint. Ethan swallowed. James leaned closer, voice low. You hear that? Ethan nodded. Judge Keller lifted his gavel slightly. We will proceed to... And then he paused, because something else was coming. Not from Madeline, not from Victor, but from the consequences of everything she had already said. Until... Judge Keller did not rush. That, more than anything else, unsettled Madeline. She had expected a reaction by now, a ruling, a reprimand, something she could push against. Instead, the judge sat with his hands folded, eyes lowered to the thickened file before him, as if weighing not just facts, but patterns, the kind that didn't announce themselves until it was too late to deny them. Mrs. Cole, he said at last, before I issue temporary orders, there is one matter I want clarified. Madeline straightened instinctively. Yes, Your Honor. You've characterized your actions as protective, the judge continued. You've framed Mr. Cole as unstable, yet multiple witnesses and documents suggest otherwise. He looked up. Help me understand the discrepancy. Madeline inhaled. She glanced at Victor, who gave the slightest shake of his head, but Madeline was tired of being quiet. With respect, she said, you're seeing a curated version of Ethan. James did not move. Ethan did not react. Madeline went on, her voice gaining force. People who haven't lived with him don't see the full picture. They don't hear the silence, the way he withdraws, the way he disappears emotionally. Emotionally, Judge Keller repeated, not physically. Yes, she said, and that matters. James stood. Permission to inquire, Your Honor. Judge Keller nodded. Proceed. James approached the podium again, slower this time, not pressing, allowing the moment to ripen. Mrs. Cole, he said, you've spoken at length about my son's silence. Yes. Did you ever ask him why he went quiet? Madeline frowned. I shouldn't have to. James nodded. Because silence is inconvenient. It's evasive, she snapped. James's voice remained calm. Or it's restraint. Madeline scoffed. You're romanticizing it. James leaned slightly forward. Did you ever tell him to stop being quiet? Yes. And did he? No. James paused. Did that make you angry? Madeline hesitated. Just a fraction. Yes. The word echoed louder than she intended. James let it sit. Mrs. Cole, he said gently, you didn't lose control because my son is dangerous. You lost control because he wouldn't perform reassurance on demand. Victor rose halfway. Your Honor, Judge Keller lifted a hand. Let him finish. James continued, voice still even. You wanted reactions, compliance, validation, and when you didn't get them, I did what I had to, Madeline interrupted, her voice sharp now. He wouldn't engage, he wouldn't fight, he wouldn't explain himself. How am I supposed to co-parent with someone who won't talk? Ethan finally spoke. I did talk, he said quietly. You just didn't like what I said. Madeline turned toward him, eyes flashing. You said nothing. I said no. The word landed. James stepped back. Judge Keller leaned forward. Mrs. Cole, is it accurate that Mr. Cole declined to sign the initial custody agreement you presented? Yes, Madeline said, because it was unreasonable. Unreasonable how? The judge asked. It gave me full decision-making authority. And his objection? Madeline exhaled sharply. He said it treated him like a visitor. Judge Keller nodded slowly. And did you revise the proposal? No. Why not? Because, she said, her patience breaking, someone had to be in charge. There it was, the sentence no one coached her to say. James did not smile. Victor closed his eyes. Judge Keller sat back. Mrs. Cole, he said, you've described your actions as protective, but what I'm hearing is a pattern of control exercised when cooperation wasn't absolute. Madeline shook her head. You're misunderstanding me. No, the judge said quietly. I'm understanding you very clearly. The room felt suddenly smaller. Judge Keller turned to Ethan. Mr. Cole, did you ever refuse to co-parent? No, Ethan said. I refused to disappear. Madeline laughed once, sharp and bitter. You always dramatize. Ethan met her eyes. You always minimize. Silence followed. James did not interrupt it. Judge Keller took off his glasses again, placed them carefully on the bench. This court does not punish parents for being quiet, he said, nor does it reward those who mistake dominance for responsibility. Madeline's face flushed. So, what? You're siding with him because he's calm? No, the judge replied. I'm siding with the record. He picked up a pen, then stopped. One more question, Mrs. Cole, he said. Madeline's jaw tightened. Yes? Did you ever believe, the judge asked, that your husband's silence meant he had nothing to say? Madeline opened her mouth, closed it. James watched her carefully. Finally, she said, yes. The word was small, but it changed everything. Judge Keller nodded once, decisively. That belief, he said, was your mistake. He looked down at the file again. This court has no further questions. The gavel did not fall yet, but the sound of inevitability filled the room. Ethan exhaled slowly, not in relief, in recognition. Because for the first time, someone had named what this really was. Not instability, not irresponsibility, but the refusal to be erased. Judge Keller lifted the gavel. We will proceed to orders. And Madeline, sitting very still now, understood too late that she had lost the one advantage she thought was permanent: control. Therefore, Judge Keller did not strike the gavel immediately. He held it for a moment, fingers wrapped around the handle as if measuring something invisible. The courtroom waited, not with impatience, but with the quiet gravity that follows a truth finally spoken out loud. Ethan stood beside the table, shoulders squared, eyes forward. He did not look at Madeline. He did not look at Victor Hale. He had learned, long ago, that when a decision was coming, you didn't flinch toward it. You let it come to you. Judge Keller cleared his throat. This court has considered the testimony, the documentary evidence, and the conduct of both parties, he said. His voice was even, but something in it had hardened. The purpose of temporary orders is not to reward strategy. It is to preserve fairness and protect the child. Madeline's fingers dug into the edge of her chair. First, the judge continued, regarding financial access. He looked down at the file, then up again. The unilateral restriction of Mr. Cole's access to his wages and joint funds materially impaired his ability to retain counsel and meet basic obligations. Victor shifted, preparing to speak. Judge Keller did not give him the chance. Effective immediately, the judge said, the respondent shall be granted full access to his earned wages. Joint accounts shall be restructured to ensure equal, monitored access pending final resolution. Madeline inhaled sharply. Ethan felt it. Not triumph, not relief, but balance, like a floor that had been tilting finally leveling beneath his feet. Second, the judge said, regarding custody and parental access. The room seemed to contract. Mr. Cole has not been found unfit, Judge Keller continued. There is no evidence of harm, neglect, or abandonment. The removal of Mr. Cole from school pickup authorization without court order was inappropriate. He turned toward Madeline. That action will not be repeated. Madeline's mouth opened, then closed. Effective immediately, the judge said, the existing custody schedule is modified. Mr. Cole will have expanded parenting time, including weekday overnights. All educational and medical decisions shall be shared. Victor's pen slipped from his fingers and clattered softly to the floor. Ethan's breath caught. He did not move. He did not speak. He simply stood there, letting the words settle into him slowly, the way warmth settles into cold hands. Third, Judge Keller said, regarding allegations of instability. The judge's gaze returned to Madeline, steady and unblinking. This court does not accept silence as evidence of incapacity, he said, nor does it accept service-related stress as a convenient label to justify exclusion. Madeline's face had gone pale. Any future attempts to leverage mental health history, absent clinical findings, will be viewed as bad faith, the judge continued. Should such conduct recur, sanctions will be considered. Victor finally stood. Your Honor, may we— No, Judge Keller said flatly. You may listen. The word echoed. James remained still beside Ethan, his expression unreadable. But Ethan felt his presence like a wall at his back. Judge Keller placed the gavel down, not striking it yet, just resting it on the bench. This court further orders that all communications regarding custody and finances be conducted in writing, he said. No unilateral changes, no threats. No coercion. Madeline stared at the judge, her composure fraying. This is unfair, she said suddenly. You're taking his side. Judge Keller met her eyes. I am taking the child's side. The words landed with finality. Madeline's shoulders slumped, just slightly. Not in defeat, but in the dawning realization that the ground beneath her had shifted in ways she could no longer control. Mr. Cole, Judge Keller said, turning to Ethan, you have conducted yourself with restraint under difficult circumstances. That restraint will not be mistaken for weakness in this court. Ethan nodded once. The judge looked at James. Mr. Cole, thank you for your clarity. James inclined his head. Thank you, Your Honor. Judge Keller picked up the gavel again. These are temporary orders, he said. The final disposition will follow full discovery. But let me be clear, this court will not be used to erase a parent because they are quiet. He struck the gavel. The sound was sharp, clean. The hearing was over. For a moment, no one moved. Then the bailiff announced adjournment, and the room began to stir. Chairs scraped, papers were gathered. People exhaled the way they do after holding their breath too long. Ethan remained standing, his hands resting on the table, fingers splayed slightly, as if confirming it was real. James placed a hand on his shoulder. It was not heavy. It was not lingering. But it was there. You did fine, James said quietly. Ethan swallowed. I didn't do anything. James shook his head. You stayed. Across the aisle, Madeline stood slowly. Victor leaned in to speak to her, his voice low, urgent. She waved him off and gathered her things with stiff, angry movements. As she passed Ethan, she stopped. For a second, it looked like she might say something. Something sharp, something cutting. Instead, she said, This isn't over. Ethan met her eyes. I know, he said. But it's different now. She searched his face as if looking for the crack she had always relied on. It wasn't there. She turned away. Victor followed, already pulling out his phone, already recalculating. James closed his briefcase and looked around the courtroom once more, as if imprinting it in his mind. Outside, the late afternoon light spilled through the courthouse windows, dust motes drifting in the air like quiet witnesses. Ethan walked toward the exit with James beside him. Their steps were not synchronized. They did not speak. They didn't need to. At the doors, James stopped. This was temporary, he said. They'll regroup. Ethan nodded. I know. James studied him for a moment. You ready for what comes next? Ethan thought of Noah, of the height marks on the wall, of the river at night. Yes, he said. James exhaled slowly. Good. They stepped outside together. The sun was lower now, casting long shadows across the courthouse steps. The flag out front stirred in a light breeze, the fabric snapping once before settling again. Ethan paused at the top of the steps and looked out over Maple County, the roads, the trees, the ordinary life continuing without regard for what had just happened inside those walls. For the first time since Maddie filed, he felt something unfamiliar but welcome. Not victory, permission. Permission to stand in his own life without apologizing. James waited beside him, saying nothing. Because some moments did not need words to be sealed. They only needed to be carried forward. And then, the river did not care who won in court. It moved the same way it always had. Steady, unbothered, carrying leaves and memory, and the quiet weight of time. Ethan stood on the bank just after dusk, hands in his jacket pockets, watching the water catch the last light of day. The courthouse was miles behind him now, its doors closed, its gavel quiet. What remained was the work of living. James stood a few steps back, giving space the way men did when they didn't want to crowd something fragile. They had walked here from the parking lot without speaking, not because there was nothing to say, but because words had a way of arriving late when they mattered most. Ethan broke the silence first. You didn't have to come, he said. James nodded, eyes on the water. I know. They stood like that for a moment. The river spoke for them, low and constant. I didn't call, Ethan added. Not before the hearing. James didn't look away. I know. Ethan exhaled. He had rehearsed this conversation in his head for years. Sharp words, careful boundaries, explanations that would finally be heard. None of them felt right now. What he felt instead was a tired gratitude, and something else he didn't quite trust yet. Why now? Ethan asked. After all this time. James considered the question as if it deserved the respect of patience. Because you didn't ask, he said at last, And because you were being pushed to disappear. Ethan frowned slightly. You think I would have. James shook his head. I think you would have endured. There's a difference. The words settled between them. They walked back toward the truck together, the gravel crunching under their boots. James moved a little slower than he used to. Ethan noticed and did not comment. The next weeks unfolded without spectacle. There were emails, measured, formal, watched closely now by the court. There were calendars revised and shared. There were school forms with Ethan's name restored to the list in black ink that could not be erased by a single signature. The first weekday overnight felt unreal. Ethan stood in Noah's room while his son slept, the soft rise and fall of his chest anchoring the world into something manageable. He sat on the floor with his back against the wall until dawn, listening, watching, reminding himself that presence was not something that could be revoked by a line in a document. At school pickup, Ms. Benton smiled warmly. We'll see you tomorrow, she said. Ethan nodded. He trusted his voice now. Maddie adjusted to the new reality the way she adjusted to everything, by maintaining control where she could and watching for cracks elsewhere. Her messages were shorter, her tone more careful. She no longer spoke of evaluations or instability, she spoke of logistics. Ethan answered in writing, always in writing. James stayed in town longer than he had planned. He took a small room at the inn near the square and walked each morning, his hands clasped behind his back, studying a place he had not seen through adult eyes before. They shared meals, simple ones, soup, bread, coffee that had been reheated once too many times. They did not talk about the argument from 20 years ago, not yet. One evening, as Noah colored at the table, James watched Ethan move through the kitchen with quiet efficiency, washing, drying, setting things in their place. You're good at this, James said. Ethan shrugged. It's not complicated. James smiled faintly. Most important things aren't. The words hovered, then passed. The discovery phase came and went. The record grew thicker. The court continued to watch. The balance held. And slowly, the urgency drained out of Ethan's body. Not all at once, not completely, but enough that sleep began to come without a fight. Enough that the river no longer felt like the only place he could breathe. On a Sunday afternoon, Ethan took Noah to the fairgrounds. The rides were smaller than he remembered. The lights flickered unevenly. The cotton candy tasted like sugar in air. Noah laughed, unrestrained, pulling Ethan toward the Ferris wheel. At the top, the town spread out beneath them. Fields, rooftops, the courthouse dome pale in the distance. Daddy, Noah said, leaning into him. Are you staying? Ethan felt the question land, gentle and terrifying. Yes, he said, I'm staying. Noah nodded, satisfied, and turned back to the view. That night, Ethan sat alone on the porch, the hum of insects filling the dark. James joined him, 2 mugs of coffee in hand. He offered one. Ethan accepted. I should have listened, James said quietly. Ethan did not answer immediately. I didn't want the path you chose, James continued, so I stopped seeing the man walking it. Ethan looked out at the yard, the faint outline of the swing set. I didn't want the path you offered, he said, so I stopped explaining myself. James nodded. We were both stubborn. Yes, Ethan agreed. Then, after a beat, we still are. James laughed softly. It surprised them both. The final hearing came without drama. Judge Keller's ruling reflected what had already become clear. Shared custody, shared decision-making, accountability where there had been overreach. The language was firm, the tone final. Madeline listened without interruption. She did not argue. She did not smile. When it was over, she left without looking back. Ethan stood with James in the hallway once more. This time, there was no waiting, no doors to watch. It's done, James said. It's begun, Ethan corrected gently. James smiled. Fair. They shook hands, an old habit, out of place and perfect. James left the next morning. There was no ceremony, just a quiet goodbye by the truck, a nod that carried more than words. Months passed. Ethan's life grew into itself. He fixed the fence along the backyard. He joined a small group that met on Wednesdays, men who spoke slowly and listened well. He learned to let silence be a place of rest instead of defense. He did not chase happiness. He built steadiness. One evening, as the sun dipped low, Ethan stood at the edge of the river again. Noah skipped stones beside him, counting splashes. The water moved on. Ethan breathed. He had not been saved by a speech or a dramatic turn of fate. He had not been remade by victory. He had been recognized, and in that recognition, given room to stand. Silence, he had learned, was not emptiness. It was a boundary. It was the space where a man decided what he would carry and what he would no longer allow to be taken. Ethan watched his son laugh, the sound clean and unafraid. He stayed, and that in the end was everything.